Pakistan-Afghanistan peace talks, the third round of which ended without any agreement in Istanbul. And since both sides, the Afghan side and the Pakistani side, have been leveling allegations against each other. The Pakistanis accuse the Afghan side, specifically the Afghan Taliban, of not stopping TTP or Pakistani Taliban elements from attacking its forces and civilian areas inside Pakistan. On the other side, the Afghan Taliban government says that this is an internal issue for Pakistan and has been long before the Afghan Taliban took power in 2021. What is the reality? Well, on top of it, a war of words has and narratives is currently underway on social media between Afghan and Pakistani activists and leaders. To get a better understanding of this, I'm joined once again from Kabul, Afghanistan by Obaidullah Baheer, who is a professor lecturer at American University, Afghanistan. Obaidullah, before anything else, let's begin with how you have been targeted and attacked. What kind of well, I guess things are you facing online on social media following the collapse of these peace talks in Istanbul?
Hi, Ali. It's always good to be here with you and with your audience. I mean, it's natural, right? People don't want to hear difficult things, and in this whole post-truth world, and where there are organized machines of lying, you really miss out on the genuine voices, right? Which means that, I mean, we all know the more respectable faces and names within Pakistan, and it's fair to have a discussion with them. But um, we have this whole new culture of online bots and online accounts that are hired by the institutions, and they tend to murky the waters, right? They make it's an easier world for them to build dichotomies out of everything, right? It's either this or this, and there is no more space for nuance, and the only currency that sells is hatred. And it's ugly. It's ugly because it doesn't matter what the policymakers, the politicians do today. What is really unfortunate is that this well is being poisoned, this poison being spread in the hearts of the people, because there is a common bystander who doesn't really know what is happening, and they step into this arena and they see the narrative being built for them, so this is typical Chomsky manufactured consent. The rulers take decisions, don't consult anyone, and then make it look like you had consented, make it look like this is something you wanted. And this whole TTP narrative is that as well, right? It's a narrative based on amnesia. It's a narrative based on complete escape from guilt and responsibility. Like, this reminds me of how, like, after August 15th, 2021, when the Taliban came to power, we had certain politicians who would come on and be like, okay, here's how we solve the problem. And these were politicians who were in power for 20 years. And you would look at them and you'd be like, buddy, slow down. Like, how about you start with an apology, start with owning your own part in all of this, and then we can talk about solutions, right? Earn your place on the table. And the thing is, like, I mean, this has been happening in Pakistan for a very long time, right? The fact that there's this central institution that monopolizes power, that monopolizes narrative, and it's constructed this whole pseudo environment for the common person, in which even when the good ones want to speak up, I mean, you saw the posts of, I think you guys had a gathering of journalists where the journalist says, we're not allowed to talk about Afghan refugee expulsion, right? There are like so many things that you're not allowed to touch, that even when an Afghan from this side is trying to look for that ray of hope, trying to look across and find people who are genuinely empathetic, you can't see them because the ones that are silenced, right? And that further aggravates the situation, further leads to hate. But I mean, this is not new, like we've been in the mix of things internally, externally, internationally, where you do get attacked for taking a stance, for talking nuance. So it's just another day for us.
A central part, or I guess one of the words have a lot of meaning in this context, and a lot of Afghans who have come of age, including you, grew up in Pakistan for some time. Pakistan was heavily involved in the conflict in Afghanistan, the wars in Afghanistan, and the resolution somewhat of it, allegedly even supporting the Afghan Taliban, or the so-called resistance forces that were fighting first against the Soviets, then against the Americans. A word that has come out and now is being used from both sides, or phrases, this idea of traitor or namak haram. Tell us about this specific word, what it means on both sides when it is used against by the Afghans and the Pakistanis.
I mean, I think the only time it was used from the Afghan side was Taliban Tarana that calls the Pakistani military Namak Haram, right? So, and it's a response to this term being used widely. If you look at the history of the term was originally devised by the Mughals, who had suffered under the reign of Sher Shah Suri, and a lot of the history written at that time. I mean, even the history of Afghans being descendants of the Jews was written at that time within the courts of Akbar. And that was all coming from a stance of hate, a stance of creating a whole narrative around a people. And then that was adopted by the British as well. So there are British historical records of the time, actual East India Company employees who were very important individuals who, if you read the histories of the time of the first Anglo-Afghan War, you will see in their records that they refer to Afghans as Namak Harams. And what is the justification of using that term is, A, they understand that this is something that would really hurt the honor of the Afghans, but also they label the Afghans that refuse to side by them and their occupation and their malicious designs for Afghanistan as namak harams, right? So there's this implied argument, and like, look, I keep thinking about this quite a lot, right? Thing is, there's no denying the kindness that Pakistan or Pakistanis specifically showed Afghans, right? There is a political side to it because, like, what you narrate for others is Pakistan's constant support for anti state elements, right? For 50 years. And that's ugly. That's sad because at one point, you know how bad it feels when someone dictates to you about your internal politics. But it was completely okay for you to do it in Afghanistan for 50 years. Whatever led to the refugee movement, right? Even though Pakistan cannot have its cake and eat it too, cannot be like, yeah, we were involved. Yeah, thank us for being involved in the Russian resistance. But then, hey, oh, I paid such a heavy price for refugees. You either take the credit or you don't, right? So refugee movement happened. There are arguments that can be made all day long about what were the pros and cons. Did Pakistan really benefit from it? Did its GDP improve when it sided with the United States during the US invasion? Did its GDP improve when it sided with the Americans during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan? And all of that, right? So ultimately, there was a decision of internal national interest that led to whatever decisions were taken. And yes, refugees came. I, as an Afghan, have seen a lot of good from Pakistani people. I have not denied that. I will never deny that. Now, the other side is that obviously creates a tolerance in me, right? Ali, so you and I interact, we're good friends, you've been kind to me. And I'm like, every time we have a saying in Pashto, something that shows up in front of your eyes, right? So when you're acting maliciously towards me, the first thought would be, wait, I remember Ali's kindness, right? So my tolerance for your actions is going to be much larger than someone else's. But that tolerance is going to have a limit, right? There's going to be a point where it turns from you expecting gratitude to you expecting servitude, right? Which is a saying in Pashto that says, Wahamadi khozare bana. I'm going to beat you up, but you're not allowed to cry, right? So you're not even giving us the right to be disappointed. in how the refugees were weaponized, how trade is being used as a pressure mechanism, how you have expelled millions of Afghans with nothing to go back with. And then, like in this past month of hostilities, you've closed the crossings and you've expelled the people from the cities, right? You're expecting them to live in parks, live on the roadsides, and not have a way to go back. Do you know that flights from Islamabad and Kabul are booked for weeks in advance? The tickets skyrocketed, right? Because you have refused to give any other means of crossing between both countries. So all of that just leads you to this idea of like how, and the fact is, I know that, Ali, people like you, other Pakistanis that we know, the intellectual elite, they're not using these terms, right? This is coming from a specific sector of the people, but I can tell the difference. A lot of Afghans are not going to be able to tell the difference, and this is going to feed into that hate that has been developing across both sides. So it's always specific political agendas that are trying to stray us away from each other. And look, we can't go away, like we're not going anywhere, you're not going anywhere, and we have to learn to live together. And it's extremely unfortunate that the very same organizations that were supposedly involved in bridging the gaps in youth engagement in Pak Afghan forums, they're the first mouthpieces of the establishment right now, and they're like willing to go to every extreme to push the narrative that somehow the Pakistani establishment is holier than the Pope, and the Afghans are, all of them, like in the world that they construct, every Afghan at night goes into the specific meeting that we have on planning where the next TTP attack is going to happen, and like celebrating, give cheers to each other about every death that has happened in Pakistan. That's not the reality. We're extremely indifferent towards the TTP situation. We have zero interest in TTP coming to power or not coming to power. Yes, if you ask me as someone who's studied counterinsurgency, who's studied IR, who studied politics, I would tell you that the current approach will never work with the TTP. You can never eradicate the whole ideology. You will have to figure out how to move forward with them. And the fact that this was the thinking in Pakistan much earlier on, from 2010, when you settled with them in Swat, to even 6 months ago or even 2 months ago, where you were willing to talk to the TTP. And then suddenly the script has changed where you don't talk to terrorists anymore, and these are fitna khawarij, and you have to eradicate them. You've tried to eradicate them. The Americans tried to eradicate the Taliban and their thinking within Afghanistan. Where did that get them? Why isn't this thinking taking hold within Pakistan, and specifically within the Pakistani military?
Point of view, obviously, in all of this is that the TTP is closely aligned with the Afghan Taliban, that the Afghan Taliban have not only turned a blind eye to the activities of the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the Pakistani Taliban, quote unquote, but that they are actually encouraging them. The Pakistanis also say that if we tried everything, we tried talking to them, negotiating with them, but there is no way that you can negotiate with people that come and keep on attacking you while simultaneously negotiating with you. There's another element in all of this. A figure known as Ahmed Shah Massoud, who was part of the NRF, the Afghan opposition to the Taliban, which was in control when the Americans were in play, they have come out and sided, or basically accepted Pakistani position, that Afghanistan is being used as a place to stage terrorist attacks into Pakistan. How would you make, or what do you make of all of this, these shifting dynamics?
Okay, I think first off, important to reiterate, whatever the Taliban are doing or allegedly doing has nothing to do with the common Afghan. Worth remembering, right? For starters. Second, Salim Safir, who I love as a person, recently wrote an article in Jung, I think, and he says, oh, it was always our fault. Why did we divide between good Taliban and bad Taliban? Why did we think that the Afghan Taliban and the TTP were different? They're all the same, right? Which is quite an unfortunate thing coming from such a senior analyst, right? The fact is that they are different, right? The fact is, yes, there are accounts within Pakistan that are going to, or individuals within Pakistan who are trying to sell that narrative, which is saying TTP and the stupid term TTA are supposedly the same. Like, look at how childishly you're trying to delegitimize an opposition you're talking to, right? So the fact is that you have to understand that the TTP's bay'ah, right, Pledge of Allegiance, is symbolic towards the Afghan Taliban Emir, or the Emir of Afghanistan right now, or the Emir of all the Mu'mineen. And that should not be mistaken for a power structure existing, right? Yes, there is reverence, there is an ideological tie, but that does not mean that the TTP takes its command from Islamabad, from Kabul, right, or Kandahar. So you have to remember that. And then, I mean, Ahmad Shah Massoud is quite an irrelevant figure within Afghanistan. That's like me. Who do I pick up in? I start taking Ahmad Wali, Asfandiar Wali's son, as like someone who's Aymal Wali as someone who's serious and worth engaging with. But thing is, this whole rhetoric of the 23 groups operating from within Afghanistan. This is a UN sanctions and monitoring teams report. This team, A, does not have teams within Afghanistan. B, its reports, according to itself, is corroborated and collected from regional actors and neighbors. So who has the biggest incentive in saying that Afghanistan is a global threat? Because you saw the Moscow summit statement saying we're very happy with the security situation in Afghanistan. You saw the US intelligence report saying, oh, Al-Qaeda is at another, and we're very happy with our collaboration with the Taliban. So no one else has a problem. Only Pakistan, the Pakistani military, has a problem. And the problem is real. TTP is a real problem. It's not worth dismissing. It's growing in stature. It's really hurting Pakistan as a state and the military establishment as well. But then the conversation should be about how do you approach it? Because you have to understand that less than 2 months ago, when you had the trilateral meeting here, when the Chinese and the Pakistani delegation were here, the conversation was that the Pakistani authorities requested the Taliban to help convince the TTP to de-escalate in violence because they wanted to talk to them. They wanted to reach a political settlement, but they wanted the temperature to go down a little within Pakistan so that they could not look so weak discussing with the TTP. And anyone who's privy to this conversation can reaffirm that. But that de-escalation does not happen. And somehow that anger then is projected towards the Afghan Taliban. And then we suddenly go from a world where I want to talk to the TTP to a world where I don't talk to terrorists, and now someone else has to give me a guarantee of them never attacking us. Let's take, for instance, the claim to be true that Pakistan is claiming that the Afghan Taliban control the TTP. Okay. In that world, if you were the Afghan Taliban, what incentive do you have to give up the only card you hold against Pakistan? Because Pakistan historically has not stood by its word, has been an extremely bad neighbor who's always flirted with your opposition groups, right? You want a tool of pressure. But obviously that should not mean that it translates into a major crisis within Pakistan. That is in the instance where we say there's command and control from here. But the reality is that TTP came to be in 2006, 2007. In 2010, you sat down with them, you had a conversation with them, you settled on SWAT, you tried to do the Indonesia model, somehow you fudged that up. Then you went into operations, then you caused thousands of families to migrate into Afghanistan out of fear of being bombed and killed by Pakistani bombs and drones. Then 2021, the Taliban are in power. What do the Taliban do? And like, you cannot both accept that these are factual truths. Like, let's not live in an Orwellian world where a war with Oceania never happened, you know? So these things are factual truths that have happened. Pakistan demanded the Taliban to take steps about the TTP. What did the Taliban do? One, they unarmed the refugees that had come in, right? So that none of them are taking part in TTP fighting. The Amir al-Mu'mineen gave you a religious decree saying no Afghans are allowed to fight in Pakistan, right? They did that, which came at a very big cost, because remember, they were already being accused of being proxies of the Pakistanis, right? So the Taliban, newly coming to power, are giving up so much in their face value to their own population by doing this just to satisfy Pakistani demands. Then they say, well, these guys are very close to the Durand line and this is causing a problem for us. You move them from Durand line, right? And then you're also accepting that these are refugees that have left Waziristan. And then you also say, no, these are not refugees, and stop calling them refugees. These are TTP fighters. So there have been a lot of concessions, including the talks that were mediated and facilitated. And then please remember, and I really hope that your audience cross-checks this, it's not just the Taliban spokesperson who recently spilled the beans about the talks that had happened with the TTP. 95% of all disagreements were resolved, and there was a political settlement in sight with the TTP. But then your military chief changed, your chief of intelligence changed, your prime minister was locked up, and suddenly the talks were blown apart, right? And if you don't believe me or the Taliban spokesperson, then listen to Maulana Fazlur Rahman, who was privy to these conversations. And he has an interview out there where he discusses this, and he says, yes, we were very close, and eventually it was sabotaged from our side, right? So the point is, okay, let's play scenarios, Ali. You tell me, war breaks out between Pakistan and Afghanistan. What is the end goal for Pakistan? Give me a sensible outcome for it. And then also tell me, you go to full-fledged war with TTP, no negotiations with terrorists. How does the TTP problem get resolved? Give me one example in the world where an organic movement from within a country that is a response to atrocities just has been uprooted and eliminated altogether. What do you think the best case outcome is out of both these scenarios, Ali?
It depends what the objective is. If the objective is the survival of the country, as a lot of Pakistanis say, for example, I'll counter it to you, right? An argument being made, and the terms that have evolved is fitna al Khawarij, that the Pakistani military and the establishment now uses against the TTP, and something called fitna al Hindustan. They claim that these groups are getting patronage from India. They cite the visit of the Afghanistan interim foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, to India. Even people that aren't aligned with necessarily with the Pakistani establishment say we have evidence, and this is one of them, that the Indians are supporting the Afghan Taliban government in Afghanistan against us, and the TTP is a tool in this larger play. Some accounts also claim that India is now transferring weapons to Afghanistan through this air corridor, an alleged air corridor that has been created after Muttaqi's visit. So there are all these counter arguments that are going there, and they're saying this is a fight for our survival, our existence.
Okay, fair enough. So there's always been this whole Indian boogeyman argument that, I mean, at some point you have to really call bullshit on it, right? Like, not everything bad that is happening is India, you know? So everything is by some way or the other. I mean, the very same Indians who did not give us a single visa, who had zero ties with the Taliban until like 1 month ago, suddenly are now giving us weapons and everything is perfect. Okay, TTP might have ideological ties with the Taliban. What common grounds do we have with the BLA? Like, what could anyone be giving us where we want a secular separatist movement that does not want anything with Afghanistan to support them, right? It can't be for shits and giggles, right? It has to have some strategic goal. Take your best case scenario. Let's say survival of Pakistan. Tell me, how does survival of Pakistan work when you start an open war with Afghanistan? Let's say you do a week's bombardment, get rid of as much of their leadership as you can. What do you do next? Do you have the economic strength to keep going for it? Do you have the political support to install another government, to fund it, to run it? Do you have could NATO do it for 20 years? Can Pakistan do it better now? Because I mean, pick any literature on fragile states, failed states. They're like the perfect breeding grounds. If you're not happy with the TTP now, see what TTP becomes the moment you get rid of the Afghan government. And then also see what you get when you open borders and you declare an enemy out of the Afghan Taliban. Do you know how badly the Pakistani military was hurt by just night vision goggles reaching the TTP? Because, yes, I mean, the first, when the Taliban came to power, there was a bit of a black market for weaponry, which was stopped really quickly by the Afghan Taliban. But a few night vision goggles went through. Do you know how big of a headache it has been for the Pakistani military so far? Imagine when all of what NATO left is then passed on to TTP. Like, how does the survival of Pakistan look better when you keep pursuing the war with the TTP and keep trying to solve it militarily, or if you then up it a notch and start an outright conflict? And that is if we realistically believe that can happen, because there are so many countries within the region and globally that will not accept Afghanistan in a political vacuum, because they're happy with their situation and they're not going to let you ruin the party for themselves, right? If the security is going to get bad, they're going to be under threat eventually.
Another thing, countering that, and there's this perception now, at least on the Afghan side, flipping it, that the threat perception for Pakistan has changed. That what you are saying, Ubaidullah, is all good, and in perfect normal times that these arguments would hold sway. But now, because the threat perception has changed, because now the Pakistanis have some sort of backing, at least from the White House, to carry on these things. There's also this conspiracy being floated after Trump's statement on Bagram that the Pakistanis actually don't want a peaceful resolution to this, that they want to gift Bagram to Donald Trump or create circumstances in which the Americans can take hold of Bagram Air Base once again. So there's also this idea that is going about.
Okay, so a few things. There are quite a few loopholes in that theory, and I see a few very respected people floating this theory as well. It's unfortunate because Trump is the one who signed the Doha deal, opened the Doha deal. First part, fourth clause says no foreign troops are going to be present in Afghanistan, right? So Trump is already promising that. So it's a very weird world where they publicly state they're not going to have any troops, and then supposedly there's an annex where they were planning on giving Bagram, but Biden was so weak-spined that he didn't take it and he rushed off. So there's that. The Taliban in no way or shape or form are going to undermine their own struggle for 20 years by giving a base to the Americans. B, Pakistan would not realistically take that mission on. I don't think rationally that is something that could be done, considering Russian and Chinese concerns of the Americans coming back to Bagram. And I mean, the Chinese would look at you and think, I invested in you for 20 years and this is how you et tu Brutus, right? So I don't think that is going to happen either. And I don't think the White House has given a blessing to this conflict. You have to understand that the Americans, even as we speak, are sending funds and sharing intelligence information with the Taliban. And this is on record. This is not an opinion. And it's a fight against ISKP, right? So why would they both invest in an entity to fight ISKP, then also invest or bless a war that gets rid of them or replaces them as a regime? The United States didn't fight for 20 years and leave with the peace deal that they signed. You would be shocked to find out, Ali, the Afghan government is very close to getting really good ties with the Americans soon. They have their in, there are very good conversations, there are deals on the table, and this thing might happen, right? So it doesn't make sense for them to be looking forward to better ties with Afghanistan and then also bless a Pakistani war. I think the only thing that has happened, and Trump being Trump, is that the Pakistani generals were like, look, you signed a peace deal with them in Doha. Whenever we tell the Taliban to take care of the TTP, they say the TTP isn't a global threat, where it isn't included in the Doha deal. And they're like, include them in the global terrorist list, right? So that happens. And then they imply from that, okay, now the Americans are fine with us taking things into our own hand. If this thing goes on, the Americans will step in. They will end it. And I mean, in an absurd world, I mean, maybe this is a wild theory, but I feel like maybe the current Pakistani government or the field marshal is trying to add another number to the ambassador of peace, President Trump, that this is the ninth conflict that he has ended, not knowing that it's going to be a question mark why out of the nine, two of them have been involving Pakistan, So, but I mean, realistically speaking, I really don't think that there's an American blessing to this conflict. I think that what has happened is, and here's the disappointing bit, Ali, like we as outsiders, when we would look at Pakistan, we would say, okay, you don't have stable democratic governments, you don't have consistency of policy making, but you have a deep state, right? And the deep state at least means that there is an institution that's making decisions, and that institution has consistency of thought, has a vision for where it wants to go, which is great. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. But the sad truth is that there is no institutional thinking. It is always whoever's on the top chair within the military, they make their own decisions based on how they feel. And that has led us to a complete shift from where Bajwa was versus where Asim Munir is today. And this whole upping the cost, like you're pushing yourself into a corner. There's an interesting saying in politics. It says, a smart politician's mouth is in his tummy. So he's not commenting on everything, and he's giving answers that don't really lead him to a point where he has to take a U-turn or is at a dead end. And when you have engaged in so much bravado and you have made TTP so deeply linked with Afghanistan, now if you don't take action, you're damned. And if you take action, you're damned either way, right? So that is a situation that they've created for themselves. And it's unfortunate. It could also involve the amendment that is coming up. This could be a diversion tactic. This could be one of many other things that the establishment is currently doing, whether it's discussing Gaza deployment, whether it's the Houthi conflict that they're involved in now. And it's easier to keep everyone engaged, find a common enemy, an outsider, and fuel everyone up in saying, keep looking that way and let us get shit done on this side. But it doesn't help. It doesn't help the region. It doesn't help Pakistan. It doesn't help Afghanistan. And I mean, it breaks my heart. Like I said, we've been amazing neighbors. We've been amazing to each other. And to arrive at this point where so much is being lost just because of specific egos, yes, the TTP is a concern. Yes, the TTP has solutions, but the solution is based on dialogue, is based on a settlement with them. And the Taliban in Afghanistan can facilitate it, but they cannot command them to forego their grievances, their political goals. It's a misconception if you assume that the Taliban even have that sort of control or can achieve that.
It comes down to listening to you speak. It comes down to, I think, the question that is in front of us is the question of legitimacy. The Taliban, during this whole conflict, and we had instances where there was alleged firing on civilians in Pakistan, in Muridke, for example, against on this anti-Israel protest led by this religious group. The Taliban, Zabiullah Mujahid, came out with a statement, and there's this constant idea that the regime in Pakistan right now, the government in Pakistan, does not have the legitimacy or the backing of the people. And an example, as you mentioned, is this 27th constitutional amendment that seeks to empower the military leadership and the military regime led by the field marshal. Alternatively, the Pakistani regime also says that it was a mistake to support an entity like the Afghan Taliban that doesn't have legitimacy in Afghanistan, and they cite what they've done with women's rights and education. You have a parallel that has emerged here where there are serious questions on legitimacy from the Afghan side. Do the Afghan Taliban have more legitimacy now than they did before this whole escalation with Pakistan happened?
A Pakistani journalist in a recent interview said that, oh, if you ask in Afghanistan, then like the Taliban aren't supported by more than 3% of the population. It was really funny because I was thinking, okay, I guess like what, 6 months ago, a year and a half ago, you switched off live TV to rig elections in real time, okay, and your ex-prime minister is in jail, whilst the current president is someone who's renowned for his corruption globally, and all the other million issues. Like, I'm not saying this to be to instigate, but I'm saying it was like the kettle and the pot, glass houses, all of that, right? So I feel like what Pakistan doesn't realize is, like, they did the biggest favor they could to the Taliban in these military hostilities. Like, if the Taliban's, let's say, popularity was at 5, it's at a full 10 now. Because if you go out on the streets and ask anyone, any Afghan, look, Ali, you have to understand that in a population of 40 million people, when close to 2 million are being mistreated by a specific entity, right? When the actions, for example, let's say, like, contextualizing this is important. Ali, has your life been directly affected by Afghanistan in the past or till date? Like, something that the Afghan government has done that has directly affected you or a direct family member? There isn't a single household in Afghanistan that has not felt pain that has originated by Pakistani policies, whether it was overthrowing our governments, whether it was supporting opposition groups, whether it was now with these hostilities, whether it was the refugee expulsion, right? When 2 million people are being expelled, how many have family members within the 40 million? Like, 220 million में आप हिसाब लगा लें कि आपका कितना बनता है, कि सोचे उतनी population आपकी सफर कर रही हो उस scale पे. People are going to feel that, right? So this negative sentiment towards the state isn't happening in a vacuum. But then, okay, what you ended up doing is that already hatred towards the state, and the Taliban have problems. We have internal problems. All these criticisms are valid of the problems we have internally. But once you gave them this common enemy, you made the Taliban heroes of the Afghan nation, right? The first time ever a government in Afghanistan put its foot down and said, no, I'm not going to take this disrespect, right? And the Taliban have been maneuvering in that way. Initially, I thought they were overcorrecting for being taken to be proxies of Pakistan. But there's a genuine pride amongst Afghans about how the Afghan Taliban have represented them. It's not perfect, but they have taken bolder stances. I mean, the thing is, I think Pakistan was, and this was sort of why Istanbul's talks failed as well. Ali, historically, there's a saying, "Kasi ke naan dahad farman dahad," anyone who feeds you gives you orders as well, right? And what happened was, during the Soviet invasion, it wasn't Pakistani money. It was American money matched dollar to dollar by the Saudis, but who was paying it out, right? It was Pakistan. And Pakistan used that to establish a hierarchy of power with the Afghan leaders, which meant that an ISI general or even colonel felt like he was powerful enough to dictate terms to an Afghan leader, right? And the thing is, that mentality hasn't changed. Like, I feel like in this negotiations, the fact that we heard about how many times Pakistani delegations got up, how much the voices went up, and so on and so forth. The ISI chief gets there and within less than 12 hours is already at the airport and leaving. It's because, like, they don't expect or this demand of, like, mutual respect and talking as equals, because they're like, no, I'm used to giving the orders and someone has to obey. And even with the Taliban, for the 20 years where they were dependent on you in one form or the other as patrons of their movement, that was the treatment you were giving them. But now they don't need you. I mean, they didn't need you the moment they took power through their own might and not through a political settlement. So that thinking had to change. And the fact that Pakistan was expecting too much. I mean, when Faiz Hamid comes and he says, "It is very good," it is showing that you thought that you're going to have your ambassador as a viceroy in Afghanistan. And if you remember the first few pictures of the Ambassador Mansour sitting in cabinet meetings, in ministry meetings, chairing the meeting, like, what? And so all of that led to a response, a reaction. And now they're not willing to accept this, the fact that there is a government in Afghanistan that we have to talk to like we're going to talk to any other government in the world, and why equate us with India? Like the historical baggage and everything that you have with India isn't the same with Afghanistan. Why turn it into a situation where it's ditto what India accuses you of doing, what you accuse India of doing, and now you're like accusing Afghanistan of doing as well? Like, where does that get you? How do we ever get anywhere without this mentality changing? Look, we had a discussion yesterday. We had a group of intellectuals sitting down, and the question was, at what point do we judge the common Pakistani for not speaking up against the current military approach towards Afghanistan? Right? So, for example, and this is an extreme example. I know, like Nazi Germany sort of makes logical arguments very difficult, argumentum ad Hitlerum and all that. But like in Nazi Germany, right? How responsible was the common citizen for what the Nazi regime was doing? How much are they guilty for what was done? And right now, like, because someone actually commented, and I was saying we should not hate the common Pakistani citizen. The Pakistani citizens are our Muslim brothers, and we have to make sure that we have a world that we can inhabit together in the future after this conflict as well. And someone commented saying, look, who are the people that barge into homes that Afghans vacate within Pakistan and take them over? Who are the people who are silent and sitting at home and not coming out, not speaking out against this? And the argument then was, well, it's not like it's a real democracy where the common Pakistani can use their voice and their vote and their freedom. If in an ideal world, yes, I would be disappointed with the common Pakistani. But I know you have a gazillion other issues that you're not allowed to speak on, that you're not allowed to protest about, that you cannot demonstrate. How long has it been that you have a curfew in Islamabad where no one can come out and demonstrate? I think it's been a few years now. So, in that world, मैं क्या गिला करूं आपसे, right? But like, it does really warm my heart when Pakistani friends reach out and they ask me what's happening. And then when I explain to them what's happening, and they're like, wait, that sounds a lot like what Israel does, And I was like, yeah, they're using an insurgent group as an excuse to bomb civilians in Afghanistan. Because why would it always be civilians that they're bombing? Ali, if they had such precise information about the whereabouts of the TTP, then they would have been able to target them better within Pakistan, right? You do not have that intel. And that means every time you're going to engage in military adventures in Afghanistan, you're going to look like the bad guy. You're going to look like you've bombed civilians, which you have, right? Because there's no way of spinning it. Because the next thing is you're going to start using the Israeli arguments. They're hiding under the schools and the kindergartens, and you sound like Rabbi Shmuley. You don't want to be that person, right? And the Pakistani military needs to understand that. The Americans tried drone bombing for ages. It doesn't really get you anywhere when you don't have access. And the false delusion that you hear the military junta saying, we know Afghanistan street by street. Shouldn't you know KPK much better than Afghanistan? Why is the TTP giving you such a hard time there? Or why is the BLA giving you such a hard time in Balochistan? Like, there are a lot of internal problems, and the solution isn't militaristic. And militaristic needs a soft touch and some foresight as well. But the current approach, like, how many videos did you see in just the past week of like mosques and homes being bombed in Pakistan? Right? Like in the areas that the military operation is happening, how often do you see civilian deaths coming out? Right? And this is despite all the ban on media coverage for it, yet this is all that you hear. And it's getting ugly. And there has to be sober heads that sit down and say, okay, because this approach is exactly what was done with Al-Qaeda as well, right? The world looked at Al-Qaeda and we created this term terrorist, right? Fitna Khawarij, right? Just other them to the extreme. And this is the law of the pirates, which means that these people are enemies of humanity. That means rendition is allowed, torture is allowed, bombing, collateral damage, all of that's allowed. And which meant that Al-Qaeda, so terrorism is defined as committing acts of extreme violence for its own sake, right? It just makes it sound like there is no political agenda behind it, right? And until later on, you find scholars who say, well, the most violent terrorist groups are actually the most easy to deal with politically, because the more they're willing to invest, the more they're willing to actually sit down and reach a logical conclusion. And here, the fact that you make it sound like the TTP are some crazy devils incarnates that have descended from the sky, the less easy it is to sell this military agenda. But if you think of them, where are these people coming from? These are people whose families have been bombed. My father used to say that, do you hear me? Yeah, my father used to say that Bagram Air Base and its prisons were factories for producing mujahideen, right? So the fact is that your operations aren't eliminating these supposed terrorists, they are creating them. Because every family you bomb, you're creating 6 survivors who are all going to fight with you till the bitter end. And that doesn't solve the problem, because you will keep descending into chaos, because it's a spiral. And at the bottom of it is together into the abyss. You reach a point where you lose all rationality, your opponent loses all rationality, and you're just going to go into fana with each other. So the sooner that realization hits, the quicker you can not only deal with the internal problem, but also figure out how to work with the Taliban and Afghanistan towards a resolution to the problem, instead of these high strung demands of saying, stop TTP attacking us, or take all the TTP into Afghanistan and settle them there and guarantee to me that they're not going to attack me. I mean, why? Like, why would I do that?
Final conclusion, moving towards a final conclusion very quickly. There's a Praetorian state that is emerging or has resurfaced in Pakistan. It's a shift towards what they like to call a hard state, where the military is now will be supreme in a lot of theaters, especially when it comes to the defense and planning for the security of the country. Should Afghanistan come to terms with this reality and basically submit to this hard state reality of Pakistan under a field marshal, like the Pakistanis are being forced to do as well themselves?
I think the more pertinent question is, should the Pakistanis submit to such a
Well, the
hard state?
Pakistanis have, as you can see, they are being.
I lost your voice a bit for there. I think you're muted.
Yeah,
You went
sorry
on
about
mute
that.
first.
The argument is that the Pakistanis are already being forced into submission by this Praetorian state. So shouldn't the Afghans then follow suit?
I mean, look, either, and this brings us back to the Pandora box, that's the Durand line. I mean, if you see Durand line as an international border, like I've been saying this, I'm like, maybe Pakistan should start seeing Durand line as an international border instead of asking the common Afghan to do that. Because if the moment you do that is when you realize that your neighbor is a sovereign state who's going to have its own national interests, who are going to have their own citizens to look after. And once you recognize that, once you approach the negotiations from a point of view of sitting across equals, only then can we engage in a dialogue, right? You cannot expect the Afghan Taliban or any government in Afghanistan. And this is a sad thing, right? And this is a continuation of the very same old policy of the past 50 years, which is, I am going to expect complete servitude from whoever is on the throne in Kabul. And the moment I feel like they're not listening to everything, I'm going to invest in opposition groups and I'm going to make really bad investments. You did the same with the Mujahideen. You did the same with the first Taliban government. You did the same with Karzai. You did the same with Ghani. All of these entities, at some point, you'd started working with, and then within months, you were like, oh, okay, these guys aren't listening to everything we're saying, so now let's invest in opposition groups. And that hasn't gotten you anywhere. And there has to be a realization that, okay, we're dealing with an independent sovereign state. Let's talk to them about matters of mutual concern. And as long as there's a weaponization of refugees, of trade, we're not going to really get anywhere. And this does look like an uphill battle. But my prediction is that with Turkey being involved at the level that it is and the Chinese pressure increasing, I feel like, and these calls came to Pakistan first, not to Afghanistan, and these are by Pakistani records that testify to that, saying that there seems to be, and then you also saw that Pakistani accounts were blaming Qatar for taking sides in the negotiation as well. That just shows you that if everyone is thinking that you're not being the helpful party to the negotiations, then there's going to be pressure on you. And I feel like the only way we can get out of this is if the pressure builds large enough for the Pakistani establishment to adjust their demands. If they come back to the conversation of, okay, how realistic is it that you can talk to the TTP and de-escalate with them? That probably can happen, but you have to, because this was your demand 2 months ago. You cannot have gone and bombed Afghanistan and killed civilians and engaged in military hostilities and now start demanding even more than what you were demanding before you had made all of this so costly to help you. So you cannot both up the cost of compliance and up the demands as well. That's not how negotiations or smart negotiations work. So I think the more realistic approach would be sit down, say, okay, how realistic is it that you can de-escalate with the TTP? What is a time frame that can work? Okay, at what point do we sit with the TTP? What does that conversation look like? And just like figuring out even the fact that we have some sort of monitoring mechanism emerging from these talks is also a big blessing. So it's not just your word against mine. We're going to have teams in between that are going to monitor and verify claims that are being pushed forward by either or. That's a good thing, because then at least we know whether, like the fact that they say, okay, BLA attacked an army train in Balochistan, somehow Afghans are involved. So I mean, just not to make those sorts of wild. So here's the thing, and just coming back full circle to organized lying, right? Hannah Arendt used to say that the goal of organized lying is not to replace the truth with a lie, but undermine factuality itself. And the sad part here is that you're undermining your own claims. Like, okay, maybe there are Afghans involved with the TTP, right? But then when you keep adding 100 different wilder claims to it as well, including BLA complete control with Afghanistan, you just make your whole case weaker. So focus on the things that are more real with more realistic demands, and sit down, discuss them. Let's figure out a way out of this, because this helps no one. It doesn't help your economy. It doesn't help mine. These military hostilities eventually lead to psychos who are going to post saying, let Kabul burn. And then that's going to cause 100,000 people to feel like we've lost all our humanity. I would never endorse anything like that coming. And yad rakhe, please, that till date, despite all the hostilities, there hasn't been a single Afghan official who has said that the life of one Afghan is more important than 100 Pakistanis, right? That has come from your top man that is leading your whole system. And that's unfortunate that we get to a point where the enemy is then the common civilian. And yeah, I mean, let's hope there's a better way out of it, because I mean, this is sad and unfortunate.
When you flood the gates, anything goes. Obaidullah Baheer, thank you so much. American University in Afghanistan lecturer, friend of the show, joining us with his insights. We appreciate your time. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section. Do like, subscribe, and share this content. I will see you soon. Till then, take care.